The United States has just released what may be the most alarming civilian evacuation directive in contemporary memory, and its implications point toward one unmistakable conclusion. Military confrontation with Iran is no longer a distant possibility, it's approaching fast. In the early hours of February 5, 2026, the U.S. virtual embassy responsible for Iran published a security bulletin unlike anything seen in recent diplomatic history. The message was stark and unambiguous: depart Iran immediately. Develop an exit strategy that operates independently of any United States government support. This wasn't a suggestion to reconsider travel plans. This wasn't advice to exercise heightened vigilance. This was a direct instruction to get out, right now, today, and to abandon any expectation that American authorities will mount rescue operations if the situation deteriorates. The language of the advisory reads less like standard diplomatic caution and more like preparation for armed conflict. It warns American nationals currently in Iran to anticipate road network closures, the complete suspension of public transit systems, wholesale cancellation of commercial flights, total internet service blackouts, and the disruption of both mobile and fixed-line telephone communications. For those unable to depart Iranian territory, the guidance is equally grim. Take shelter immediately, accumulate emergency supplies of food and drinking water, secure necessary medications, maintain charged electronic devices, and stay away from any public gatherings or demonstrations. This document doesn't resemble a conventional travel advisory. It reads like an evacuation protocol dressed up as a recommendation, and the timing of its release, issued just hours before crucial American-Iranian nuclear negotiations, scheduled to take place today in Muscat, Oman, suggests that Washington anticipates catastrophic developments regardless of whether those diplomatic discussions succeed or collapse. What makes this evacuation directive particularly foreboding is a simple fact. There are almost no ordinary American civilians present in Iran. The State Department has maintained its highest level travel warning, Level 4, Do Not Travel, for Iran for many years. Tourism from the United States to Iran is virtually non-existent. Business travel is effectively prohibited. The only Americans who remain in Iran are predominantly dual U.S.-Iranian nationals, individuals whom the Iranian government treats exclusively as Iranian citizens, regardless of whatever American passport they might possess. So if there are barely any regular American tourists or business travelers in Iran, who exactly is this evacuation order designed to reach? The answer becomes clear when you consider who would actually be operating inside Iran, despite all warnings and restrictions: intelligence personnel, CIA operatives, undercover agents working beneath false identities or dual nationality cover. This evacuation advisory serves as encrypted communication, telling covert operatives scattered throughout Iran to extract themselves immediately because military strikes are imminent, and the method of dissemination proves this interpretation. Iran has systematically shut down internet access across the country. Mobile phone networks have been blocked. Landline telephone services are heavily restricted. Ordinary American citizens trapped inside Iran cannot even access this advisory through normal channels. But intelligence operatives maintain secure communications infrastructure, Starlink satellite terminals, encrypted satellite phones, clandestine communication channels that bypass Iranian government restrictions entirely. The United States government published this evacuation order openly and publicly because it represents the fastest method to reach scattered intelligence assets operating throughout Iranian territory. It functions as an emergency broadcast, transmitting a simple message: operations are compromised. Armed conflict is beginning. Extract yourself while extraction remains possible. The specificity embedded within these warnings reveals just how much American intelligence services understand about Iran's preparations for conflict. The advisory mentions anticipated road closures. This is because Iran is repositioning military convoys and wants to prevent foreign surveillance of those movements. It mentions disruptions to public transportation. This is because Iran is implementing security lockdowns throughout major urban centers. It mentions internet blackouts. This is because Iran intends to sever international communications infrastructure before military operations commence. American intelligence possesses detailed, granular knowledge of Iran's pre-war mobilization activities, and that knowledge derives directly from the operatives this evacuation order is desperately attempting to extract before fighting begins, because if those operatives are captured once hostilities start, they will be tortured for information and executed as foreign spies. The advisory's specific language regarding dual nationals reveals another disturbing dimension to this situation. U.S.-Iranian dual nationals must exit Iran using Iranian passports exclusively. The Iranian government does not recognize dual nationality and will treat American-Iranian dual nationals solely as Iranian citizens. The advisory states clearly. Translation: if you are an American intelligence asset who also holds Iranian citizenship, Iran will execute you as a traitor to the nation, not merely detain you as a foreign intelligence operative. There will be no diplomatic protection, no prisoner exchange negotiations, just summary execution for espionage and treason against the Iranian state. The State Department understands this reality perfectly. That's precisely why the advisory explicitly warns that U.S. nationals face significant risk of interrogation, arrest, and indefinite detention in Iran. Simply displaying an American passport or demonstrating connections to the United States can provide sufficient justification for Iranian security forces to detain someone. This isn't hypothetical risk assessment or bureaucratic caution. This is describing the active, immediate threat that intelligence operatives face at this very moment as Iranian security services actively hunt for American spies in anticipation of expected military conflict. And the timing aligns perfectly with multiple other indicators that conflict is approaching. Today's nuclear negotiations in Muscat represent what may be the final diplomatic attempt before war erupts. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, President Trump's own son-in-law, are scheduled to meet with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Israel has already publicly dismissed these talks as futile, with Israeli media reporting that Prime Minister Netanyahu communicated directly to Trump that negotiations serve no purpose and that military action has become inevitable. So diplomatic talks proceed even as American intelligence operatives flee Iran, even as Iranian forces deploy ballistic missiles to pre-positioned launch sites, even as U.S. Navy carrier strike groups maintain operations in the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea, even as Israel positions its military forces for coordinated strikes targeting Iranian nuclear facilities. This isn't genuine diplomacy seeking peaceful resolution. This is pre-war positioning that occurs when both sides understand that fighting is coming, but both wish to be perceived as having attempted peaceful alternatives before violence erupts. The evacuation advisory reveals something even more alarming when you examine the specific guidance it provides regarding departure routes, guidance that demonstrates American military planners expect Iran to seal its borders once hostilities commence. The advisory explicitly instructs Americans to depart overland through Armenia or Turkey if doing so can be accomplished safely. It provides detailed border crossing information, which crossing points remain open, what documentation is required, how long visitors can remain visa-free in those neighboring countries. Why emphasize land routes so heavily? Because American intelligence knows that Iranian airspace will transform into an active combat zone. Commercial aviation is already experiencing systemic collapse. Air India has cancelled all flights to Iran through the end of February. Indigo has suspended Iranian routes indefinitely. Multiple European carriers now avoid Iranian airspace entirely. And this isn't merely about airlines exercising prudent caution. This is about airspace that will soon contain combat aircraft, cruise missiles, armed drones, and ballistic missile interception attempts. No civilian aircraft can safely operate in that environment. Therefore, the evacuation order tells operatives, drive to the Armenian border crossings at Egarak or Norduz, or the Turkish border crossings at Gurbulak, Bazargan, Kapikoy, Razi, or Esendere Sero. Cross on foot if vehicular passage becomes impossible. Just get out of Iran before military operations begin and borders seal completely. The advisory warns that flight cancellations and disruptions are possible with minimal advance notice. That represents diplomatic language for commercial aviation will cease entirely once strikes commence. Iran will close its airspace. Missiles will make flying suicidal. Anyone remaining in Iran when that happens becomes trapped, and the shelter-in-place guidance provided for Americans unable to evacuate reads precisely like instructions for surviving an urban siege. Locate a reinforced position, accumulate food and water supplies, gather essential medications, keep electronic devices charged to maintain intermittent communication capability, avoid all public gatherings, monitor local media sources for breaking developments. These aren't travel recommendations. These are survival protocols designed for civilians trapped inside an active war zone. But here's the element that reveals America's true calculations. The advisory explicitly states, the U.S. government cannot guarantee your safety if you choose to depart using the following options. You should leave only if you believe it is safe to do so. That disclaimer functions as legal protection against future lawsuits when Americans die attempting to flee. The government is essentially saying, we're instructing you to leave, but if you get killed during your escape attempt, that's not our legal responsibility. That's the kind of liability language you employ when anticipating mass casualties, and the repeated emphasis on not relying on government assistance proves even more revealing. Have a plan for departing Iran that does not rely on U.S. government help, the advisory insists. Translation: when fighting starts, we are not dispatching rescue teams. We are not organizing evacuation flights. You are completely on your own. Compare this approach to evacuations from Ukraine in February 2022 or Afghanistan in August 2021. In both those cases, the United States government organized charter flights, provided secure ground transportation, and actively assisted American citizens departing conflict zones. Not this time. For Iran, the message could not be clearer. Leave now using your own resources, or accept that you will be stranded inside a country at war with the United States with absolutely zero prospect of rescue. Why this dramatic difference in approach? Because American military planners understand that any evacuation operation conducted inside Iran once hostilities begin would require deploying American troops into hostile territory where they would face Iranian ballistic missiles, drone swarms, and potential capture. No president will authorize that kind of high-risk mission to rescue intelligence operatives and dual nationals who disregarded explicit evacuation warnings. So the operatives receive one opportunity to depart, right now, today, before Friday's diplomatic talks collapse, before Israel launches strikes against Iranian nuclear installations, before Iran retaliates against American aircraft carriers and military bases, before the entire region erupts into what could become the largest Middle Eastern war in generations. The New York Times published a story yesterday claiming that Iran had agreed to negotiate on both ballistic missiles and nuclear enrichment levels. Israeli officials immediately characterized that reporting as false. They stated that American negotiators were engaging in wishful thinking and that Iran has demonstrated zero flexibility regarding missiles, which Israel considers the primary existential threat. That fundamental contradiction reveals everything about where negotiations actually stand. America wants a diplomatic agreement. Israel insists no viable agreement is achievable. Iran refuses to compromise regarding missiles. And while diplomats engage in discussions in Muscat, intelligence operatives flee Iran. That's not the pattern associated with successful diplomatic negotiations. That's the pattern of diplomatic theater staged immediately before inevitable military action. And the evacuation order's warnings about internet and communications disruptions reveal another terrifying dimension to what's coming. Iran is implementing precisely the same information blackout they utilized during January's protest crackdowns, the period when government security forces killed an estimated 6,000 to 20,000 demonstrators. The playbook is identical: cut internet access, shut down mobile networks, restrict landline service, isolate the country from external observation, then conduct military operations, or implement mass violence without the world watching in real time. Iran employed that strategy to massacre protesters in January. Now they're implementing the same communications blackout in anticipation of expected American military strikes. Why? Because when those strikes occur, Iran will retaliate not merely against military targets, but potentially against civilian infrastructure as well. And they don't want the international community watching in real time as Iranian ballistic missiles potentially strike American aircraft carriers or United States military bases throughout the Middle East. The information blackout creates operational security for Iran's retaliatory strikes. It prevents Americans from coordinating defensive responses in real time, and it limits available evidence of Iranian actions that might compel international intervention or demands for escalation controls. So the United States evacuation order warns clearly: expect complete communications failure, plan alternative methods to contact family members, assume you will be digitally isolated once fighting commences. That's preparation for total warfare, not limited precision strikes, not surgical military operations, but full-spectrum conflict where communications infrastructure itself becomes a legitimate military target and information flow gets severed completely. So here's what this evacuation order actually signifies, and why it indicates that Friday's diplomatic talks in Muscat represent theater before tragedy. The United States has concluded that military conflict with Iran has become both necessary and inevitable. The evacuation order represents step one in a military operation sequence that culminates with American ordnance falling on Iranian nuclear facilities within days or potentially weeks. President Trump didn't authorize this advisory simply because he's concerned about American citizens' safety. He authorized it because his military commanders informed him, "We need intelligence assets extracted from Iran before we initiate strikes. If they remain in country when missiles launch, Iran will execute them as spies, and we possess no capability to prevent that outcome." So the operatives receive evacuation orders first, then the military strikes happen, then Iran retaliates, then the regional war that everyone fears becomes reality. And the evacuation order's publication mere hours before Friday's nuclear negotiations reveals the deep cynicism underlying current American diplomacy. Trump's negotiators in Muscat aren't genuinely attempting to reach agreement. They're establishing diplomatic cover for military action that's already been decided. The narrative script writes itself. America presented reasonable offers. Iran refused to negotiate seriously. Diplomacy failed despite our best efforts. Military action became necessary to prevent Iranian development of nuclear weapons. We had no alternative, except that narrative is fiction. Iran has consistently offered to negotiate regarding nuclear enrichment. They've proposed temporary limitations, international inspection regimes, and safeguards against weaponization. What they absolutely refuse to negotiate is their ballistic missile arsenal, because those missiles represent the only thing preventing Israel from destroying their nuclear program with complete impunity. And Israel has communicated directly to Trump that any diplomatic agreement that leaves Iranian missiles intact is categorically unacceptable. Netanyahu's position couldn't be clearer. Iran's ballistic missile arsenal poses an existential threat to Israel that no diplomatic agreement can adequately address. The missiles must be destroyed through military force. So Trump confronts an impossible choice. Option 1. Sign a nuclear-only deal and watch Israel strike Iranian missile facilities unilaterally, triggering regional war anyway. Option 2. Refuse any deal and authorize American strikes on Iranian nuclear sites, triggering that same regional war, but with American responsibility and American casualties. Either pathway leads to war. The only variables are timing and who receives the blame. The evacuation order suggests Trump has selected option 2. American strikes, American responsibility, but also American control over timing and escalation management, at least initially. And the coordination between American evacuation orders and Israeli military mobilization strongly suggests joint planning for combined operations. Israel strikes Iranian nuclear sites. America strikes ballistic missile production facilities and launch sites. Both nations coordinate their attacks to overwhelm Iranian air defenses and limit retaliatory capabilities. That's the operational plan. Here's why it will fail catastrophically. Iran has spent 40 years preparing for precisely this scenario. They've constructed and hardened nuclear facilities deep inside mountains that conventional weapons cannot destroy. They've dispersed ballistic missile launchers across thousands of square kilometers of territory. They've positioned anti-ship missiles throughout the Persian Gulf coastline. They've stockpiled thousands of drones, cruise missiles, and naval mines. They've activated proxy military forces throughout Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And they've promised publicly that if America strikes, Iran will sink American aircraft carriers, close the Strait of Hormuz to all shipping, attack United States bases across the entire Middle East, and launch sophisticated cyber operations against American critical infrastructure. That's not empty rhetoric or propaganda bluster. That's announced state policy backed by repeatedly demonstrated military capability. The USS Abraham Lincoln currently operates in waters where Iranian anti-ship ballistic missiles can reach it. American military bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Iraq operate well within range of hundreds of Iranian missiles. And Iranian government hackers have already proven their ability to penetrate American water treatment systems, electrical power grids, and industrial control systems. So when American strikes commence, Iran won't simply absorb punishment and capitulate. They'll retaliate using every weapon system they possess. They'll inflict casualties that will shock American public opinion and force immediate political reassessment of war objectives. Thousands of American sailors could die in aircraft carrier strikes. Hundreds of troops could be killed in military base attacks. Global oil prices could spike toward $200 per barrel. Worldwide economic recession could follow within weeks. And President Trump will own all of it politically. Every American death, every economic consequence, every strategic failure. That's why this evacuation order carries such enormous significance. It demonstrates that despite understanding the horrific potential costs of war with Iran, Trump is proceeding anyway, because Israeli political pressure, domestic political calculations, and his own public rhetoric have boxed him into a corner where backing down appears weak, but attacking risks absolute catastrophe. The intelligence operatives fleeing Iran right now understand exactly what's approaching. So do Iranian military commanders positioning missiles and drones for retaliation. So do Pentagon strategic planners conducting casualty estimate war games and recession scenario modeling. Everyone involved in this process knows this is going to be a disaster, and they're doing it anyway. The evacuation order doesn't prevent the coming tragedy. It merely ensures that when tragedy arrives, America's intelligence operatives won't be counted among the casualties. But the thousands of sailors aboard American aircraft carriers, the hundreds of troops stationed at Middle Eastern military bases, the millions of civilians throughout the region, they don't receive evacuation orders. They just receive war, and war is coming. The evacuation order proves it. Friday's diplomatic talks won't change that reality, and nothing President Trump says publicly about diplomacy and peaceful resolution will prevent what's already in motion. The intelligence operatives are departing Iran for one reason, and one reason only. Their government is about to attack the country they're fleeing. The intelligent ones already left. The rest have hours, perhaps days, before extraction becomes impossible. And when the first missiles launch, everyone still inside Iran, whether American operative or Iranian civilian, becomes collateral damage in a war that nobody genuinely wanted but everyone saw approaching. The evacuation order was the final warning, and final warnings mean time has run out. This is Dav, reporting for Hems Reports. Stay informed, stay safe, and remember, in times like these, understanding what's really happening isn't just important. It's essential for survival,